Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Every touch is a step forward. By Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. And by No Foods, no grain, no gluten, no guilt.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, Quinn Nystrom was diagnosed with type 1 as a teenager, and she has a wild story. Her prom date asked if diabetes was contagious and spread by kissing.
He was such a smart kid, top of our class. And I'm flabbergasted that anybody would think that you could get type 1 diabetes from kissing me. I also don't want to be single the rest of my life either. So I thought, I hope not everybody thinks this.
That experience prompted Quinn to write her book, If I Kiss You, Will I Get Diabetes? She's also run for office and speaks nationally about her experiences. She's been advocating since before she was diagnosed. 3 years prior, her little brother was first in the family with type 1. Plus, a talk with the people at MySugr, a company that says they want to help make diabetes just a little bit better.
Dealing with the disease every day is probably will never be fun. No, of course not. But we just try to give that little bit of more excitement to do the stuff that you need to do anyhow. And just to have that little fun, at least.
That's MySugr CEO Frank Westermann. And if you're familiar with them, you know I didn't get the slogan quite right. Well, there's a reason for that. We'll find out more during the interview with Frank. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to Diabetes Connections. I'm Stacey Sims, your host. So glad to have you along. If you're new to the show, my son was diagnosed with type 1 right before he turned 2. That was 12 years ago. 12 years ago this month. He is almost 14. Holy cow. My husband lives with type 2 diabetes. I don't have any kind of diabetes, but I worked in broadcasting for 20 plus years, local television and radio, and that's how you get the podcast. And speaking of my husband, he basically spent the first week of December walking around saying, it's December already? And I know we're well into the month now, but I kind of still feel like that. This is just flying by. We've got one more show to close out 2018, and then we got some great new stuff to come in January. If there's anything you'd like me to do in the new year, any dream guests or any suggestions, any format changes, please let me know. You can always email me, Stacey at diabetes-connections.com, or ping me over social media. All the links and every way to reach me are always in the show notes every week. I'd love to hear from you. For the last couple of weeks, I've been reading reviews and emails that I have received, and I love the response I'm getting to that. So I wanted to share another one. I'm sharing two, but one is very, very short. So these are both from the Apple Podcast app. Thank you so much for leaving reviews here. The problem with Apple Podcast reviews are that I can't really respond to them. They just go up. It's like a one-way conversation, and your real name isn't used, so I have no way to contact you. But I appreciate it very much. This person writes, keeps me informed. As a person living with T1D, I appreciate this regular update on the latest technology, research trends, and how others are managing life with diabetes. We hear directly from big players in the field as well as regular folks achieving extraordinary results. This podcast keeps me motivated and informed. And this is from Thaddeus B. Watitis. So, I don't know. But thank you, Mr. Watitis. Watitis? I don't know how I'm supposed to be saying that. And then the second review from Apple Podcasts is from Peace Love 31, who writes, good stuff. Can't find the Facebook group as advertised. And this is when I get a little frustrated with Apple Podcasts because I could just tell this person where to go. The Facebook group is very easy. I do link it up every week in the show notes. To get to the show notes, the best way to do this, diabetes-connections.com. Click on the episode. It's all there. Almost every podcast app that you're listening through will have a place that says details or info or show notes. And the show notes have lots of links where I give you the sourcing if we talk about studies, or simple links like to go to the Facebook group. Also, if you're on Facebook, it's Diabetes Connections, the group. That's it. You do have to answer a couple of questions to get in because I try to keep spammers out, but that's it. So hopefully, Peace Love 31, let me know if you figured that out. Thanks again for the reviews. We always appreciate that. If you'd like to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, that's fantastic. The feedback in the Facebook group is always appreciated. Or as I said earlier, just email me. I did a really fun chat with Scott Johnson just last week. He's with MySugr. It was actually not related to the interview I did with the company's CEO. I did this interview with Frank Westermann at the D-Data conference that I went to last month. But the interview was one that Scott did with me for MySugr's weekly live Facebook. So I will link all that up too. Scott is just a terrific person. If you don't know him, he is one of the earliest bloggers in the diabetes online community and just one of the most friendly people, one of the most welcoming people. I met Scott at Friends for Life, and Benny was probably 7 or 8 years old. So this was 7 or 8 years ago. It was really unfortunate, actually, because I was working with Animus at that time. And so the first day of the conference, I was working with them. I was doing video for them. I was running around the conference. Benny was kind of helping me and kind of going to the kids sessions. But he wasn't himself. He didn't really feel very well. And then he got sick that night. Real people sick, like not diabetes sick, just gross, bathroom kind of sick. And I have to say, Disney World is a great place to be when that sort of thing happens. Not because, you don't want to miss any fun when you're at Disney World. And Disney World is where this conference takes place, at the conference center, not the parks. But man, their customer service and their help is outstanding. So when I called the front desk and said, can you please send somebody up? I need sheets and towels and more stuff and help. They were on it. They were so helpful and wonderful and understanding. And it was about a 48-hour bug. So it was not the most fun conference or visit that we've had, but there was a dinner that not too many people went to on the last night of the conference. It was a fundraiser. I'm not sure they even do this anymore for diabetes scholars. And we went. Benny was feeling good enough, and there was like a little magic show, and I knew he'd enjoy it. And Scott was there. And I knew him from his blog. We had never met. And he was just as nice as you would hope. You read somebody for years, or you follow them online, and then you meet them, and they are who you think they're going to be. He welcomed us to his table. He probably doesn't even remember this because, he's just saying, hey, come on, sit down with me. And we had a great time, and it was a high point of a lousy couple of days. So I really appreciate that. And it was fun to be invited on his Facebook Live, which he does every week with MySugr. So again, I will link that up as well. Okay, Quinn Nystrom in just one moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by OneTouch. Handwriting your blood glucose levels is the ultimate throwback. The OneTouch VarioFlex meter seamlessly syncs with the free OneTouch Reveal mobile app to create your dynamic electronic logbook. And when you choose the OneTouch Reveal mobile app, you'll be joining thousands of other people living with diabetes. In fact, as of this past October, OneTouch Reveal was the #1 downloaded diabetes management app in the US, Canada, France, and the UK. To upgrade today to the OneTouch VarioFlex meter and OneTouch Reveal mobile app, visit diabetes-connections.com and click on the OneTouch logo. My guest this week has been advocating about type 1 since age 10, 3 years before she herself was diagnosed. That's because Quinn Nystrom's little brother was diagnosed first when he was 5. She jumped in to fundraise and help in any way she could. Quinn's first book was called If I Kiss You, Will I Get Diabetes? And she'll tell that story. And you'll hear she's working on her second book. She's also run for office, and she talked to the Surgeon General this summer after he wrote a pretty unfortunate tweet featuring diabetes. Here's my talk with the very busy Quinn. Quinn, welcome to the show. I'm really glad to finally have you on. I've been reading your blog and hearing about you for a long time, so thanks for making the time to come on.
I'm thrilled to be on. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, so much to talk about, from your book to your conversation with the Surgeon General, to you and your brother being involved in the diabetes community. Let's start really at the beginning. Your story is unique, in my opinion, because it doesn't really begin with your diagnosis, right? It begins with your brother's.
Yeah, it is unique in that sense. Unless people know my story, people think, well, you must be doing all this advocacy work because you have type 1. But actually, you're correct. I got my start as a diabetes advocate when my little brother Will was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes a month after he turned 5 years old. And I was 10 at the time. I was in the 5th grade, and we didn't have any diabetes history in our family on either side. And so when my parents told my older brother Thor and I that our youngest brother Will had been diagnosed with type 1, was now in the hospital, was going to stay there for several days to be regulated, to educate the family. I was devastated. I was shocked. I didn't really have a lot of information about what type 1 diabetes was. It was very relative to what I knew from the Babysitter Club book series of Stacey, the character who had diabetes. But in that hospital, for whatever reason, a little 10-year-old girl in me looked at my little brother, and I promised him that I would do whatever it took to find a cure for diabetes and to help improve his life on a day-to-day basis. And so from there, I started knocking on neighborhood doors, raising money for the American Diabetes Association. And I started going around to classrooms talking about what type 1 diabetes is, what it isn't, and letting people actually ask sort of their ignorant questions, because I saw shortly after Will was diagnosed, people would ask things, as I'm sure you're probably familiar, Stacey, with having a son with type 1, sort of questions that are very off base and not factual, but I wanted to give them an opportunity to ask that to better educate them. Did my parents give him too much sugar when he was little? No. Did he not exercise enough as a 5-year-old? No. And so that's really where I got my start with my diabetes advocacy work and speaking.
And then just a couple of years later, I assume at the time when your family was kind of settled with your brother's diagnosis, you were diagnosed with type 1. You were 13?
Yes, I was a 13-year-old girl in the 7th grade. Oh. It came as a huge shock because my parents had asked the pediatrician when Will was diagnosed, what is the likelihood that our other 2 children could get type 1? And that pediatrician told my parents at the time that would be impossible. Your family would be on the cover of the New England Journal of Medicine, which is quite outlandish, if we think about it now, what he claimed to my parents. So when my mom, who had gotten very well, obviously, of taking care of my younger brother, she started noticing the symptoms of a high blood sugar with me. And one night after cross-country ski banquet made me come home, test on my little brother's blood glucose machine. And I just remember it counting down. I think back then it was 45 seconds. And all it said was HI, which you and I both know means it can't read. It's over 600. Yeah. And I knew at that moment as a 13-year-old girl, my life was going to forever change. Even though I didn't want that life, I didn't expect that life for myself.
Do you remember your little brother's reaction? I mean, he was still pretty young at the time, but 8 years old. Did he help you?
He was so sweet. I remember him saying to me as this little cute, rambunctious little boy, he said, Quinn, diabetes may seem bad at the time, but he's like, I promise, just kind of follow me and you'll get this. You'll get it down. And honestly, I say that my little brother is like my hero because I really looked up to him so much of how he handled his diagnosis, how he really got on with his life, and it was like he wasn't going to let this broken down pancreas stop him, from doing sports, from being active, from being social. And he just had this attitude like, why complain about it? Because that's not going to change it. And so I really sort of modeled my own behavior after Will, even though I will say I really struggled that first year. And I think it was especially difficult being just a 13-year-old girl who all I wanted to do, Stacey, was fit in with my other friends. And now, I felt like a black sheep.
Yeah, that's a tough age anyway. As you know, my son is 13 right now and has lived with diabetes for almost 12 years. But this is a tougher age than we have experienced just because of those kinds of things, normal teenage stuff. How did you get through it? I know you speak to parents about their teens, and I know you speak to teens now. Any advice from going through it yourself?
The real life changer for me, which I was so resistant to, was going to diabetes camp. My mom had heard about it through a diabetes nurse educator. We have a great camp here just outside of the Minnesota border in Hudson, Wisconsin, called Camp Needlepoint. And when she broached it on me about going for a week, I was still sort of in denial and angry about having type 1. And I was furious that she was going to send me to this place for a week. I thought it was like detention, now I'm going to this place called like Needlepoint, right? I was just like, no, like you've already ruined my life. Like now you're really going to ruin my life, right? a total teenager, right, Stacey? I was like, I hate you. I'm never speaking to you again. And she brought my aunt for reinforcement, and there I was at Camp Needlepoint. But I think what was critical about diabetes camp for me was getting to be around other young girls my age who had type 1 and who had lived with it a lot longer than me. And so, again, I could see that they didn't let their diabetes diagnosis be a headline, right? It was just sort of a part of them, sure, but their world did not just revolve around diabetes. And so I think being at diabetes camp, I really learned, sure, I didn't get the choice to get type 1, but I certainly got the choice of how I was going to react to getting diagnosed. And I didn't want to live this bitter and resentful life. And so that's really what changed for me. And so when I talk to parents now all across the country, I really try to encourage them as I'm sure it's incredibly difficult as parents because you sort of, I think sometimes fear takes over. And so, you're sort of being a helicopter parent because you're so concerned for your child, but letting them sort of figure out how to navigate this disease. Maybe they're not comfortable yet, changing a pump site or something like that, but giving them a choice of what kind of blood glucose meter they want and incorporating those things at as young of an age as possible. So the child or the teenager feels part of that, of their own disease, and that they're getting to be a decision maker in some way.
Did you ever thank your mom for making you go to camp?
Well, now that I have a career as a professional speaker and have to tell this story all around the country, it's like eating crow every single time I have to tell it because she was spot on, and my poor mother had to be in the car for 4 hours with me kicking and screaming in the back saying, I hate you, I'm not speaking to you. But I have later apologized, and now everybody knows that I was wrong. My mother was right all across the country because I tell this story, because I know maybe diabetes camp isn't for everybody, but it certainly, I will say, saved my life.
Wow. We've been very fortunate, as I've shared here. We have a day camp. It's really just a weekend, but Benny was able to go, I think, at age 4. And Sleepaway Diabetes Camp, a similar experience to yours at age 7. And the director of that camp has a very similar story to yours. He didn't want to go. His parents dragged him, and then he didn't want to leave, at the end.
Exactly.
And now he's the director of the camp. So it is a great story. Let's talk about your book, because I've seen it online. And if you're not familiar, the title is If I Kiss You, Will I Get Diabetes? Is that title something that really happened? Did someone say that to you?
Unfortunately, yes.
Right back to Quinn in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. And, I remember in elementary school and even way back in preschool, Benny was not at all self-conscious about diabetes. He would show his friends how everything was done. He would check and dose right in the middle of class. But, in 8th grade, He's thankfully, he's very comfortable with diabetes, doesn't hide it, but he does not want type 1 to be the center of attention. And the Dexcom helps so much with that. Dexcom makes it easy for Benny to just glance at his smart device to give him his reading. The Dexcom G5 was the first FDA-approved device to let you make treatment decisions without pricking your finger. And of course, the G6 doesn't even need calibrations, which we love. It makes life so much easier. And I think it really lightens the burden on Benny. I know he appreciates not having to check in class and do everything like he used to have to do. Find out more. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Now back to Quinn talking about her prom date.
My senior prom date inspired the title, and it was when he was going in for the kiss. He sort of stopped at the 80-20 point, I guess you'd call it. I think they call it that in the movie Hitch. And he said, if I kiss you, will I get diabetes? And again, I was so flabbergasted. I lived now with type 1, for 4 years or something, 5 years at that point. And I was so shocked because he was such a smart kid, top of our class. And I was flabbergasted that anybody would think you could get type 1 diabetes from kissing me. I also don't want to be single the rest of my life either. So I thought, I hope not everybody thinks this. And of course, my reaction was like, no, like absolutely not. And then he said, well, isn't diabetes like AIDS?
Oh my God.
And I had to further be like, you can't get AIDS just from kissing somebody. And so he really inspired, obviously, the title of the book. He's a priest now in Ireland, which is kind of ironic. So he's, I guess, living a life of celibacy, and I'm in Minnesota. Still
Needless
single,
to say, it didn't work out between the two of you.
It did. Yeah, it definitely did not work out. But I wanted to write the book because really when my little brother was diagnosed with type 1, when I went back to elementary school, I walked down to the school library to find books about diabetes because, again, I had such a limited knowledge about it. And I wanted to know what my brother had, what he was going to go through, how I could help him as a big sister. And the only books they had were, sort of a medical jargon type book, which was way over my head as a 10-year-old. And they also had a diabetes cookbook, which, again, not helpful for me. And so all these years later, I would talk about, like, why aren't there more books about just this honest, like, vulnerable story about living with type 1 diabetes from a young person's perspective? And so my mother, who was a journalist for Minnesota Public Radio for years, she just said, Quinn, stop complaining about this book that's not here. Write it yourself. You have enough content to write this book. Write it. Get it published. And so that's exactly what I did, Stacey. I put together just what it had been like to be diagnosed at 13. There's a chapter in the book where I interview Will because he just has a much different perspective and kind of outlook of how he's lived with type 1. So I thought it was important to show people that just because, I raised the diabetes flag very loudly, that doesn't mean that I'm a better person with diabetes. Will does a phenomenal job, but he just, he's very private about it. He doesn't speak about it. He doesn't advocate around the country, and that's okay. It works for Will. And so I wanted people to see that different perspective and know that that's okay. And then my mom also wrote a piece in the back of the book from a parent's perspective of what is it like raising 2 children with type 1 diabetes. And again, it's an easy read. It's about 100 pages. But I just wanted it to be this honest thing where if there was a girl in a small town, in another state, similar to me, like I was growing up, that they could read this book and know that they're not alone and that these types of stories or awkward questions haven't just happened to them, right? That we're in this together. And that ultimately, I don't believe that Sean, my senior prom date, was trying to be facetious. I think he just didn't know better, right? He had gotten some misinformation along the road, unfortunately. And it was my job then at that point to educate him and say, no, you can't get type 1 diabetes from kissing somebody. And no, you can't get AIDS from kissing somebody. And so we've just had a great reaction to the book from young people, but also from parents and from healthcare professionals about just better understanding what the trials and tribulations are of living with type 1.
If it's not too nosy to ask, did he go in for that kiss? Did you kiss him?
No, I get asked it all the time. I did not give him the kiss because I was so turned off at that point, Stacey. I think I ditched him on the dance floor and was off because I just thought, I don't think we're a good match.
Yeah.
I thought, I can educate you, but I don't think we're going to have romantic involvement together.
Wow. One of the things that really stood out as I wanted to talk to you for the show was something that happened earlier this summer. There was a tweet sent by the U.S. Surgeon General, and I'll read the tweet, and then I want to talk to you about what you did, because a bunch of us reacted online, but you actually got to talk to him about this. So here's what he wrote. He said, "We must help the public understand addiction is a chronic disease, not a moral failing. People make bad choices, don't get me wrong, but we don't refuse CPR to folks because they chose to smoke or refuse insulin because they chose to eat fast food. Hashtag break the stigma." Now, this help me set this up again. This is not a tweet that he meant to focus on diabetes, right? He was talking about
Correct.
something else.
I believe he was actually he was quoting himself from the American Medical Association meeting that he was recently at, which to me even made it worse.
Yeah.
And he was focusing on opioid addiction, which has been a big focus of his.
Right. So he's basically trying to say, look, opioid addiction is something that we need to look at as a health condition and as a health problem, not something that we need to look at as a moral failing like diabetes. What was your reaction to that?
Well, I think my reaction was one of many people in the diabetes community, as you said, Stacey. You know, I remember it was in June and I was just scrolling through Twitter and saw it. You know, here is the U.S. Surgeon General, you know, what we refer to as the top doctor in the country. And I think my eyes probably just bugged out thinking, what did this guy just say? And furthermore, I think the irony that here he's using the hashtag break the stigma, and now he's further stigmatizing 30 million Americans living with diabetes. And I think in situations like that, you know, I think, you know, I've been doing this work now for 22, almost 23 years. You know, you've been doing all this great work, you know, since your son was diagnosed. There's so many diabetes advocates who've dedicated their life to this, right? Educating people. And so I think in those moments to see somebody with, you know, a high influence of power and to see somebody who should be very educated about diabetes, and they use their very large platform, I think he has over 500,000 followers on Twitter, to tweet that out and to know that there are people who are going to believe that is factual, right? That your son, that me, my brother, that we caused our diagnosis by eating too much fast food, and that it is going to further stigmatize us because of now what this expert doctor has said to his following. And so I was outraged. Again, as I'm sure you read through the other ones, there were, I think, thousands of people who were outraged.
Oh yeah,
you know,
I was in Italy on we were celebrating our 20-year wedding anniversary, and I was trying to stay off social media, but I saw that, and the responses were great of people in the community, and I had to chime in myself. But you know, it was wild just to see that happening. You know, while I was out of town, but then to come home and a few weeks later, you talked to him. What was that like?
Well, so I was like anybody else who wrote back right away, just saying something like the irony of the hashtag you're using is break the stigma, but now you are further stigmatizing people with diabetes. And what I did was I gave him the opportunity, again, not thinking ever, Stacey, that this guy was going to take me up on it, the U.S. Surgeon General. You know, I'm this small town girl from Minnesota. I don't have that many followers. You know, I have 1,000+ followers, but I'm not this social media influencer. And I just simply gave him an opportunity to rectify it and said, if you really want to understand what being stigmatized with diabetes is, I'll meet with you anytime, anywhere. And I was flabbergasted. I think it was that night or the next morning, wrote me back publicly on Twitter and personally apologized to me. And so, you know, I was so surprised by the whole thing. And then 2 weeks later, I was in New York City at a writers' conference on a Saturday morning, and I get a direct message on Twitter from the Surgeon General Twitter account, from his, I don't know if it was his chief of staff or somebody, saying the Surgeon General, Dr. Jerome Adams, wants to take you up on your offer and speak with you. We'd like to set up a time so that you two can have a conversation. You know, he's very interested in talking with you about your personal story and about how you feel like people with diabetes have been stigmatized. And so, you know, I almost fell off my chair. I couldn't believe that they had contacted me out of, you know, all those responses, the thousands of responses he had gotten. And as you know, they had then, you know, taken down, deleted the tweet, and I kind of just put it out there like, well, I'm putting it out there in the universe, but I'm sure he's just going to kind of let this whole thing blow over and just hope that it goes away. But I was thrilled that they reached out. And so I said, name the time. And so it was literally that next Tuesday. And we had a really nice conversation on the telephone. You know, I didn't know what to expect. Again, I was frustrated with so many diabetes advocates, like, why do we have somebody else saying this kind of stuff? But I also wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt and explain himself and see if, given the opportunity, could he, you know, use his very large platform to help people with diabetes. And so what I found interesting in that conversation is that he has several close family members who have diabetes.
Oh.
And he spoke about that, seeing them grow up with type 1 and type 2 diabetes in his family. He took the time to sincerely apologize to me and to the diabetes community as a whole. And he wanted to ask me what it had been like living with type 1 for nearly 20 years and how I had been stigmatized. And I really felt like, again, he didn't have to do this, right? It was 2 weeks later. It probably had blown over to the next, Twitter drama about a politician or something. But I felt like he genuinely wanted to hear from somebody with type 1 diabetes why we were all so upset. And he also asked me, because, he reports to the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Alex Azar, which a lot of us talk about in the diabetes world, with the insulin pricing. He asked me what are other, important issues in the diabetes world right now. And I took that opportunity to talk about the critical issue of the high cost of insulin. And I spoke to him about how we have people dying at this rapid rate all across the country because they're having to ration their insulin, and how much more expensive insulin is in the United States. And I felt like he was actually quite surprised to hear all of that. And so he promised me that he would go back to his boss and talk about the issue of insulin affordability. And
wow.
And again, I felt like the conversation went really well and that he was very open and receptive and also very apologetic for putting out that tweet that really hurt people. And he really, I felt, was very remorseful.
Well, that's good to hear. It's a little surprising that he wasn't more educated about the insulin pricing issue, but good for you for taking care of that.
Yeah, I thought, hey, if we have this chance, right, and you have the ear of this important person, let's talk about the issues that are really facing people with diabetes. And, I've done a lot of work, on the high cost of insulin, and something needs to change here in the U.S. And I wanted him to be aware of that. And certainly in his boss's meetings that he has, I don't know if that's at the White House or wherever, but that he has that conversation and passes on that information. And who knows where that goes. But I just always felt like as a diabetes advocate, and to let other people know too, as an example of this call that I had with him, that you never know who's listening, when you speak up either on social media or, at a speech or at a family gathering or with peers or coworkers. I think every single one of us can make a difference in the diabetes world. And so I hope that story inspires other people to want to step up and speak out, to know that we can all make a difference together.
People who know you may not be too surprised that you spoke with the Surgeon General because of your government involvement. Do you mind if we talk about that for a minute? I mean, you ran for office in 2016, and this was in the Minnesota House of Representatives, right?
Correct. Yes.
Were you first a local council person? What happened there? I mean, I'm only hesitating because, to me, you're very young, and I think it's awesome that you already did this. Because I think a lot of people, even my age and older, are thinking, oh my gosh, I want to stay far, far away from politics.
Yeah, I think that's the reaction that I hear from a lot of people. And I think, unfortunately, right, it's sort of getting worse the more divisive politics has been getting here. But yeah, back in 2014, it was actually the year that my book was published. A friend of mine had encouraged me to run for our local city council, Baxter City Council. I was in my 20s at the time, so I was quite young. And I was always frustrated that government wasn't more representative of the population it served. And so for me in my hometown, it was all men who were on the council and who also had filed so far for the city council for this next year. And I believe everybody was over the age of 55, 60. And we were a younger community. And again, this whole thought, this lesson that my mother's always taught me, Quinn, you can either sit around and complain all you want, or if you want to see a change, then you have to be willing to step out and put your name out there. And so I filed on the final day for the city council. I paid my $2, and I thought, well, I guess what do I have to lose? And that was in 2014. And I ran against all men for an all-male council, and I was the top vote getter.
Wow.
And so what it showed me is that it made me more optimistic that people do want government to be a little bit more representative. And then I had a great time serving on the council and was encouraged to run for the Minnesota House of Representatives, and 2 years ago at 30. And so I did it because I'm so passionate about healthcare issues. I'm so passionate, about issues that are affecting people with diabetes and mental health and a plethora of other things. And so I ran, and again, I knew it was going to be challenging. You're running against an incumbent. And there's certainly people, Stacey, during that campaign that thought I had no right to be running as a young, single female with blonde hair in rural Minnesota.
Oh.
And regardless of what they thought, I knew that I had a platform, even as the endorsed candidate, even though I had not won yet. And I was going to use that platform to speak out on these issues that I was passionate about and that I knew affected our community in the state of Minnesota. Now, unfortunately, I lost that race. But again, I don't look at it as this winning and losing thing. I look at it as I still had this incredible opportunity to show these young girls in my community that, yes, they can have a voice. Yes, they can stand up. Yes, they can run against the fields of men, and there is no problem with that, right? That their voice is just as important as the boy that sits next to them in their classroom. And so for those reasons, I felt like I won that election. Even though that didn't put me down at the state capitol, I set out to do what I wanted to do, which was to make a difference in the lives of people in our communities.
Do you think you might ever run again?
So people ask that quite a bit. And, I would have been up again to run this year for the state house or for city council. I would have chosen that. I chose not to run this year just because the whole ironic thing, Stacey, was after, quote unquote, losing the legislature, my speaking and writing career really blew up. And what I found is that people were very interested in my political run and to hear about that experience. And so I started speaking about that on stage, writing more about it. And I found I could still be just as impactful, but even to a larger audience. And so for me, I'm not going to run this year. I've made that up, obviously, but I wouldn't rule it out in the future. I always say never, depending on where I'm at in my life and where the opportunity arises.
Well, that's really interesting. I hope you keep us posted about that, because we could do a whole show on what you learned from running a political campaign. I mean, I was an intern a million years ago for a campaign in New York, in the New York area, and I was my dual major at Syracuse, which we're going to talk about in a moment, was broadcast journalism and policy studies. So in politics there. So maybe that's another podcast for another time. But
absolutely.
Yeah. So quickly, let's mention Syracuse University, because you did your graduate work there, right?
I did. I had always dreamed of going to Syracuse ever since actually I had done a speech out in Buffalo when I was the National Youth Advocate for the ADA and had visited Syracuse. I didn't end up going there as an undergrad, but really wanted to go back, get my master's degree, and go to Newhouse in particular. So I went to get my master's degree in communication management, and my graduate school research was focused very specifically on how communication messages from medical professionals, parents, peers, and the media affect a type 1 adolescent self-efficacy. So this whole thought with Albert Bandura, who kind of coined that term about what is one's self-confidence in executing, sort of something complex. And so for me, I was looking at what communication messages affected, for the good or the bad, a type 1 adolescent's ability to really feel confident to execute, as we know, this very complex, complicated disease that you don't get to take one day off from. Because, as a speaker now traveling all over the country, there are a lot of people I meet who are young adults who, some of them have adapted very well, are doing very well with their type 1, and some other people who are really struggling. And so I was so curious to see what are things that could affect them in their adolescent years that have to do with communication messages. it was really interesting where adolescents look at their most sort of knowledgeable sources when talking about diabetes, where their fears are, what motivates them the most, talking about their relationships with their parents. So it was really fascinating, and I'll make sure to send that to you.
Speaking of Syracuse, though, I did want to ask you, I was going to ask about the snow and the weather. You're from Minnesota. I can't even make a good joke about, like, oh, no, adjusting to Syracuse. But did you enjoy your time there?
I loved it. I absolutely loved the campus. As you know, I think there's just something special about it.
Such a great place.
And I think the Newhouse School is as incredible or even more incredible than I could have ever imagined. Just the caliber of professors that we got at the Newhouse School. I was just amazed that I just got to sit in the classroom and listen to them, you know, which wasn't always my academic experience. And so I really felt like I got to hone my communication skills even more and really become more of a subject matter expert on this research that I conducted. And I really attribute that, and I'm so grateful to Syracuse for giving me that phenomenal education and foundation.
That's so cool. If you're not familiar, you know, there is the school she's talking about is the Newhouse School of Public Communications, where I'm going to just say it, like, all of the best broadcasters graduate from, and you have a little school pride there. But I mean, you know, half of ESPN is from there, and there's so many other people we could name. And of course, it has the best mascot, Otto the Orange. So
yes, of course.
And I think they just got a College Diabetes Network chapter just this year.
Oh, they did? Oh, that would be great.
Yeah, I heard through the grapevine that it just started. It might be very small right now, but it just started this year, so I'm very excited about that.
Oh, that's really exciting.
So, Quinn, before I let you go, what's next? I mean, I know you're speaking, you're writing, you just got your master's degree, but there's so much ahead of you. And can you share anything you're working on now, or are you just taking this time to kind of see what you want to do?
Yeah, well, so I'm still speaking all over the country, which is something that I so love and am so passionate about. So people can certainly always go on my website, QuinnNystrom.com, to see if I'll be in your area or your state, because I just love getting to meet people when I'm out on the road and hearing their story. I'd love connecting with people that way. I guess the biggest thing that's very exciting for me that I'm working on right now that I can share is I'm working on my second book.
Oh, great.
And it'll veer a little bit off of, sort of having diabetes be the focal point of the book. And it's going to be more focused on sort of this redefining defeat in one's life and, you know, the lessons that I've learned from politics. I used to compete in the Miss America pageant system, talking about sort of failed relationships that I've had in my life. And I just felt really, especially after the election 2 years ago when I ran for the legislature, you know, there was a lot of counsel that I got at the time. I guess, you know, maybe wasn't the best counsel, but that really, you know, when my name was being sort of slugged through the mud, or, you know, you were getting all this stuff kind of thrown at you, I was told kind of just keep your mouth shut, play nice. When they go low, you go high. And so, you know, there were just things that I never spoke about because that was the advice that I was being given. And so I felt like, especially this past year, with really being inspired by so many women just who were stepping forward and speaking up, who were making such a huge impact, I know, on my own life, on other women's lives that I know, that I really felt compelled to write this next book and to really talking about strengthening and finding your voice through some tough times. And I'll certainly be writing about things that I've never spoken about publicly in this book, with the hopes that it can help other people find their voice and find hope from their own stories.
Wow. I can't wait to hear it. And I can't wait to read it. It's going to be great. And Quinn, you know, it's such a good point, because bringing it back to diabetes, I have found this just happened in my local group yesterday. When someone shares something negative where they have felt defeated and they're honest about it, people come out of the woodwork saying, that happened to me. Exactly right. There was a mom in my group who posted just yesterday and said, I can't do it. I'm a terrible mom. My kids are driving me crazy. Don't even talk to me about food. Nobody in my house wants to eat anything. You know, it just went on and on of this, you know, just a regular diabetes mom vent that we've all been there before. But sometimes we get so busy saying, look at my straight Dexcom line and look at this beautiful meal I prepared and my children. We forget that sometimes sharing the defeat can be a huge help. So I really appreciate that, because as long as we don't stay down for long, I think it's a great thing.
Absolutely. And I feel like, honestly, Stacey, it's why I started sort of speaking and writing, because not like, I just focus on all the bad things that have happened or my worst moments with diabetes, but I just was always frustrated that I felt like when I was listening or reading other people with diabetes stories, it was always sort of painting this perfect picture, like I climbed Mount Everest because of diabetes, or, they went into these incredible things, which are very inspiring, but I never found them relatable. And I just wanted somebody to tell me like that they also woke up with a blood sugar of 400 yesterday, and that they honestly have no idea what went wrong in the middle of the night, and that it's okay, right? And that our society, like, if they do point a finger, they don't know what they're talking about, and that a lot of people with type 1 diabetes experience that, and that we can separate that from ourselves individually, right? That doesn't make Quinn a bad person, or that doesn't make Quinn incompetent of managing her type 1 diabetes, right? That was a bad day. Something went awry. We all know that happens. Okay, what's the next best decision I can make with my type 1 diabetes management? And so I feel like that's what my story is about. That's what my message is about. And that's what I so want other people to desperately hear.
Love it. Quinn, thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to speaking with you again, and definitely keep us posted about when your book comes out.
Absolutely. I will. It should be early 2019.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
More information on Quinn, on her book, on her research, just go to diabetes-connections.com. Lots of links in the show notes, and I'm interested to see what her next book is all about. Fun to talk to her about Syracuse, and about so much else as well, of course. In our Know Better segment this week, let's talk about MySugr, what it is and how they want to help you. Okay, I'll say it. Make diabetes suck less. When I started talking about Know Better foods, one of the first things that I knew I was going to talk about a lot were the cookies. They are so good. I love the double chocolate. I like the cinnamon a lot too. What I love about them now is that they come in variety packs, and they come in a different size. They were so big. If you go back and listen to me talking about them in January or February, I'm talking about like cutting them in half and trying not to eat the whole thing at one sitting. And I think they really listen to their customers, because they've still got the original, but they've got them in a smaller snack size, they call them. And they've got a variety pack, which I think is terrific. We also love the Know Better waffles and the syrup. And, they have such great recipes. You can do a lot with the different products that they have. The buns, the chocolate chips, it's a really great concept because it's not just grain and gluten-free. It's tasty. It's not like that weird consistency sometimes that can happen with these kinds of foods. Find out more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the No Foods logo. MySugr is a startup that was founded in 2012 in Austria. And many of the people who work there have type 1 diabetes, as you will hear. Their logo is Make Diabetes Suck Less. And I'll tell you what, growing up, that was a very bad word in my house. I mean, that was a curse word. My father would never let us say that sucks. So I laugh all the time. And you've heard me on the show when people say like, diabadass or things. Oh, I cover my delicate ears, because there's just certain words that make me kind of, clutch my pearls, as they say. I have no idea why. It's so funny. But I talked to CEO Frank Westermann about that and much, much more, of course, when I had the chance to interview him at the D-Data Summit from Diabetes Mind last month out in California. So what is MySugr? It's an app-based, really all-around care service for people with diabetes. You have diabetes coaching. They will send you what they call a bundle, where you get unlimited test strips and a meter, and the coaching goes along with that. They were acquired by Roche in the summer of 2017. Here's my interview with CEO Frank Westermann, who, by the way, lives with type 1 himself. Tell me a little bit about why MySugr wanted to come to this conference.
For me, it's always kind of the mix of people that you meet here. So you meet everything from like crazy scientists to hackers, entrepreneurs, industry, the FDA. So it's an amazing mix. And to me, always the kind of the most interesting diabetes conference of the year, basically. So that's why we enjoy to be here every year.
Do you really take back things that you learned here in the way your company operates or how you do things?
Oh, yeah. I think that kind of a lot of... I think it's always very inspiring to be here and to listen what's currently kind of being discussed, and also like in the side discussions you have with the attendees, it's just always kind of a bit mind-opening. And yeah.
So tell me a little bit about what's happening at MySugr. It's changed a little bit since it was launched.
Yeah.
What's the latest?
Yeah, no, I think, when you look at our journey, which started in 2012, the world was very different. So we didn't have any connected devices. So all the kind of great things we can do now with like data science, integrated management services for diabetes, it was very, very different, and we were focusing on an app. And since then, we very much developed from just being an app to right now really being a service, an integrated diabetes management service. And we hope that people have fun and enjoy kind of to get better with their disease while using MySugr. We, for example, we provide now a coaching service that you can use simply by using our app, basically. We provide our patients on an unlimited basis with test strips, and we integrate with a lot of diabetes devices. And maybe you heard about, the latest partnership that we closed with Novo Nordisk. So with that, connected pens will soon integrate. I think it's just, step by step, we're just building up a great open diabetes ecosystem that helps the patient to get better with their numbers.
One of the things I've noticed, and it seems like MySugr is a good example of this, is that in the last, let's say, 5 years, it went from people thinking that playing games to make it more fun or interacting with each other to make it more fun has kind of slipped into the background as people want diabetes to slip more in the background, right? You realize that it's you want less fun and games and more opportunities to think less about diabetes. And it sounds like that's the way you're going.
Yeah, I think it's always kind of a very fine line, diabetes. We always try to kind of, and we still want to keep that fun and we want to keep our edge, and that we are different than a lot of other diabetes management services. But on the other hand, of course, diabetes is not fun, and dealing with the disease every day it probably will never be fun. No, of course not. But we just try to give that little bit of more excitement to do the stuff that you need to do anyhow, and just to have that little fun at least.
Well, your tagline was "Make diabetes suck less." That just makes me laugh every time I see it, because I don't like that language, young man.
Oh yeah, I love it.
Do you get pushback about that at all?
Oh yeah, always.
Oh, really?
A lot of times, but we don't care about it.
That's really funny. I'm always curious. And you're a company that does business in the U.S. and in Europe. Is that, I don't know if the question is that difficult, but, do you mind sharing some of the challenges of that? I tend to be very U.S. focused, and I'm learning not to be.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there are a lot of challenges, and I think that some of the challenges apply for both sides of the Atlantic, but some of the challenges we certainly face more here than over there. I would say that these are challenges on maybe some particular challenge when you talk about the language, for example. I think in Europe, when we say make diabetes suck less, I think nobody really kind of understands what it means, or that kind of that it can be perceived as offensive in the US. That kind of notion is not that clear in Europe. But of course, just how you express yourself, what language you use. In the US, for example, we need to be much more sensitive about it than in Europe. Yeah. Just a very little example.
Why did you get involved in diabetes? Do you live with diabetes?
Yeah. I got diagnosed 20 years ago and live since I'm 19. I live with diabetes. Yeah.
So I'll give you not a commercial, but I'll let you talk about MySugr. What kind of difference has it made for you in your management? I assume you use it and that it's done well.
Of course. I mean, for me actually, it made a big difference, because the truth is back then, and in 2012, I just, I went to a friend. I said, "Hey, Gerald, I have troubles with my diabetes. I think, and I don't find a good app. We need to do something. And would you help me on a project and basically to get my numbers back in order?" So, and that's how it started. And that's the real truth. And we met Frederick, we met Michael, and that was a core group of us. And basically, you were discussing also Frederick's and my diabetes, and what would help us to get our numbers in place again. And so, yeah, and then just a lot of other things happened on the way.
Did you ever think it would turn out to be what it is now?
No, you always dream of certain things or whatever, but at the end of the day, and also I think we always took it step by step. We never thought about, we're going to conquer the world, blah, 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 blah. So we just said, okay, we want to help ourselves. We want to help the community. We were super happy that so many people downloaded MySugr and were using it. And I still think that, of course, the things that makes us different or maybe stands out a bit about us is that we're still so driven by patients. So still, we are now more than 100 people, but still more than 30% of our employees live with type 1. And it's just the best influence, I think, you can get when you want to improve the product, to have that very direct relationship. So even no matter if it's a marketing guy or a developer or whoever, lives with the disease and really understands what it means in a day-to-day life, it just helps so much to build a better service. So
when you're at a conference like this, do you try to find the time to talk to people using your app, to the people developing other apps, to, I hate to say patients, but people with diabetes? Do you take away things like that, bring them back and say, how can we make MySugr better?
Yeah, and I mostly try to understand, what currently kind of drives the thinking of kind of the thought leaders here. So, and maybe not so much, I try to avoid to talk about our service and what we do, and I think we get a lot of feedback anyways. But I rather want to try to understand, what are other people thinking, in which direction diabetes management should go, what are new technologies that we can maybe use. So that's really interesting for me.
Just looking back, and this is a nosy question, do you feel like you're managing better than when you first went to your friend and said, "Help me do this"?
Oh yeah, totally. My diabetes was a mess when we started, and now I'm doing pretty okay now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
And you can learn more about MySugr at diabetes-connections.com in this week's show notes. And along with that, a little bit of timing synergy here. I recently spoke with MySugr's Scott Johnson, as I said at the beginning of the show, for their Facebook Live, and I will put that link in the show notes as well. I think MySugr is really interesting. I've seen them change from this. It was kind of fun in the beginning. There was like a game and an app that you played. They had like a junior guy, a little monster, and it's grown so much more than that to this now really full service with coaching and test strips and everything else. So we'll continue to keep an eye on them, but interesting stuff and really fun people. And yes, I did ask him about the slogan. Did I call it a logo earlier in the show? I did ask him about the slogan there. Oh my goodness. All right. And now you know better. Looking ahead to 2019, yeah, I know this year's not over yet, but just bear with me here. Very excited about some of the events I'm going to be going to. If you'd like me to come speak at an event in your area, please let me know, or just, contact your JDRF people or whoever does summits and conferences where you live. I've got my first one in mid-January. That's here in the Charlotte area. We've got events already in March, April, and July. Second half of the year already in October, probably looking at another event in November. So it would be great to try to get this calendar set as early as possible. I love coming out and doing presentations. I will also tape the podcast live at your event. That's always fun to do an interview with somebody in your local area that you think is newsworthy and, want to get on the podcast. So we travel well, and I really would love to meet you. So please let me know, Stacey at diabetes-connections.com. Follow along in that Facebook group. I hope you can find us, Diabetes Connections, the group, or subscribe to the newsletter. And the easiest way to find the newsletter is just go to the website, diabetes-connections.com, and the little box should pop up while you're there asking you to sign up. I don't send out any spam or nonsense. I send out an email once a week with the show, bringing it right to your email, and any other pertinent announcements. Every once in a while, you'll get something more than once a week, but very, very limited. We are in beta now with Club 1921. So if you're in the Facebook group or you've gotten the notification about that, maybe you're participating in the beta. If you'd like to, just join all those things I just told you about. That's the best way to get in on this. And Club 1921 is a new app we are launching in January to the general public, all about diabetes events, any type of diabetes, any event anywhere in the country. I'm so excited about this. Been some bumps along the road, but we are there. So yeah, here we go. One more show for 2018. And then we've got a lot of great stuff on tap for January. So please stick around. I'm thrilled you're here. This show just keeps on growing. And we have passed episode 200 now. So we are definitely here to stay. Thanks, as always, to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. And thank you so much as you listen. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.